everybody. I know it's Friday morning, so everyone's excited about the weekend, as am I. So I will go through my perception of the buyer persona and some of the questions that I typically kind of see when I talk about buyer personas in most companies, as well as even the large company I work in right now. And I feel that it's super important to have this from a strategic standpoint for any company, and we'll kind of go into the details of why. In general, this is kind of who I am. I'm a program manager currently at a Fortune 100 company in regards to SEO, which is search engine optimization. I work on a lot of content development. I work helping small businesses all around the country. I'm also a photographer, and I also love to cook. So that's kind of just me, and I have over a decade of experience. So we kind of know what a buyer persona is, but I kind of wanted to look around and figure out, how do we want to define this? So it's typically a fictional representation of your ideal customer based on demographics, behavior, education, history. So it's not a person that, we put a name to that individual, whether it's Lisa or John, that, is between the ages of 16 and 40 or whatever it is, and we kind of try to put it into a particular bucket. And so that's kind of the buyer persona, is that the ideal individual that we want to target for marketing purposes at a company. And marketing for any company is key. I mean, because there's so many different competitors out there, marketing is what defines you guys as a company. Without it, you're essentially just like everybody else. I mean, pretty much everybody in general typically offers, good service, and they offer this, 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 and this. But if you're not defining who you're specifically going after, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So let's go into why do you need one? So it provides a company-wide clear marketing direction for any business to segment the most profitable persona in order to grow the business quickly. If you go after every single customer, that's great, but the amount of time you have is limited. So if you're not going after the customer that's going to bring in the most amount of revenue for your particular business, and you're kind of spreading your time too thinly, you're pretty much losing out on the best customers. And so you have to find out who is the best customer to really spend your time with, because really not everyone is worth the time, at least not initially. Maybe once you've saturated the market enough where you are then saying, well, listen, we've already kind of hit everybody. Let's go after the stuff that we don't typically go after, that's maybe a little bit less profitable, but will still bring in revenue to the company. And so maybe going after customers or clients that may not generate the highest amount of revenue, but will still bring in money to the company for the company to grow and for you guys to really grow successfully. And so here's kind of a good example that I did as a case study for myself. I used to do photography for a very long time, and everyone would say to me, well, do you photograph weddings? Do you photograph babies? Do you photograph this and this and this? And I will guarantee you that 90% of photographers will say yes to that question. Whether any type of photography it is, they'll just say yes. But here's the problem, and I work with photographers across the country as well, is they don't specialize in a very specific segment. In other words, they haven't defined who their ideal customer persona is, or their buyer persona that generates the highest amount of revenue. And so what I did was, I said, you know what, I can do weddings, yes, I can photograph babies, and I can do this and this and this, but I looked at to figure out which is the customer that brings in the most amount of revenue, which is the customer that I have the least amount of effort to go into. And so I decided for my particular example that corporate events were the way to go. It was where I knew clients. I segmented the market so aggressively. I knew that it was a female. I knew that she was between the ages of typically 23 and 32 because I knew that maybe she was too busy to really spend time on doing more aggressive research, and so that meant that I can price aggressively. I could basically say, listen, yes, I might be the most expensive in the area, but I am great. I have great feedback. I have great customer service. I have this, 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 and this, and you don't have to worry about a single thing. And so I would get clients like Herbal Essence would reach out to me, universities would reach out to me all the time, simply because they knew that they were paying a premium, but they knew that they wouldn't have to worry about anything. And I only targeted them, and I noticed that the amount of revenue I was generating just skyrocketed because I basically didn't focus on any other customers in general. I only focused on this particular type of content and this type of market. And even the way I then developed my marketing was specifically targeting corporate events, because that's where I knew where my niche was, where I was going to generate the most amount of revenue. I even redesigned the website to discuss only that type of customer, because when that customer came to me, I wanted to make sure that the messaging was on point with the customer that I'm targeting. If you develop a buyer persona, but then the marketing behind it is not in line, it's kind of a problem. There's an issue. And so I wanted it as seamless as possible, so that when you went to my site, it was all about corporate stuff. It was all about corporate headshots, corporate locations, everything only corporate. I got rid of I used to shoot fashion and all this other stuff. And I said, no, I'm not doing any of that stuff. That stuff is fun to do, but it just is not profitable, and it's kind of a waste of my time. So that's kind of the photography example. And I've done this with several other companies in the past, where we've kind of sat down and said, what is the most profitable client that you have, and go after that aggressively. And then, as I mentioned earlier, once that's saturated, then you can segment it out and say, well, maybe we have more than one persona, maybe we have two, maybe we have four, but you want to also make sure you're not fragmenting yourself too much to a point where then there is kind of a confusion across the company of who that customer persona is. So how do you guys make your own customer buying persona, or the customer persona? Is I would strongly recommend doing internal data mining. You have probably a lot of data information that you collect when you first meet with your client, whether you're doing the first time you meet up with them with a survey or whatever it is. All these questions can really be looked at as a whole and say, listen, maybe customers between this age gap that we interviewed or we spoke with when we first met with them result in this kind of revenue growth for the company over the last 3-4 years, whatever it is. Let's maybe target that specific age group. Then once we have that age group, let's look at maybe what area of what area of those 3 states they're in, what cities really are generating the most amount of business for us. Or in each state, which is the most profitable city, let's hit that city hard instead of fragmenting ourselves all across the entire state. So in general, it's also probably a good idea to work with external agencies to kind of help you hone in some of those questions. At the large company I work at, we've done in the past where we've hired an agency to kind of walk us through the process, as well as do a little bit of social media mining for us. But I don't know if that might make sense for you guys with social media. I think it's a little bit too different for your particular market. Here's just an example of a couple of customer personas or buying personas that I pulled up. So here's a sample Sally. Here's her background. She worked in this particular job. She's married. She's got kids. She's between a certain age gap. She's got a certain income. I mean, those are specific things that you need to define to figure out who your customer is. Because if you say, well, she's between the ages of 30 and 45, but then you know that a person has to be able to afford your services, and their household income needs to be at least over 100K, and you find out they're not, well, then obviously that's not your customer. So you have to define all those characteristics in order to figure out who you need to go after. Another example of a customer persona, this individual is male, between the, usually you put an age, you don't typically put a specific age, and then general household income. You want to put in some of their interests, because it helps also if you know some generalities about your customer. And so when you go in and talk with them, you also then can say, well, listen, you played tennis when you were younger. We have people that can help you out that are really into that love sports and maybe can help you get out there and walk a little bit more, or whatever it is, that kind of thing. And so then that's kind of it for that. I kind of wanted to run through. I know it went a little bit faster than I kind of anticipated. It's kind of morning, and it kind of got me going. I also then, Adina sent me some information you guys sent her in regards to who you guys think is the buyer persona. And it's interesting because this, again, relates back to slide, why do we need one? So provide a company-wide clear marketing direction. So if I looked at some of the information, so for example, I have Angela wrote 35 to 40-year-old, Michelle wrote 60 to 90, some people wrote 50 to 60, some people wrote 52 plus years old. So it's kind of all over the place that you guys think is your customer, and that's where marketing and you guys need to all discuss on who really that customer is. Because if you think the age range is too broad or too young skewed or too old skewed, then it's going to really kind of fragment the company as a whole. And if I'm a customer that's coming in, I'm not really going to know who you guys are targeting. And, I might think that you guys are for me, but maybe I'm not the most profitable customer. So you might not want to target me, especially when this will be important if you guys ever do get into like social media aspects of it and stuff like that, where you have to fragment the market a little bit to figure out who your customer is. Same thing with I'm looking at gender. Gender seems like the information you guys sent over is pretty mixed. The education level seems like there's some consensus on that they're at least educated, but there's not really anything specific. Some wrote master's degree while some wrote well-informed, which is not, that's all over the place. Again, that just tells me there's not a clear specification on who the persona should be, as well as income. I see anywhere from, some people wrote here 55,000 annual to 200 to 300,000 annual. So that's a huge range to have, in the company. So I really think you guys I recommend sitting down and thinking about that. So that's kind of it. That's kind of what I have, and I want to kind of open it up for questions and see what you guys think.
Hi, Eugene. This is Julie from New Jersey. So I think, and this was, as you were going along, this was my question anyway, and then you touched on it on the end. So we have multiple markets that we deal with, and some markets we're targeting the client themselves. So that's where you would get maybe like the 60 to 90-year-old range. Other markets we're targeting their children. Then obviously you have a younger range, but the education could be all over the place. The income could be all over the place, because when we're really identifying our referral sources who are referring these buyer personas to us. So, we hope that they are referring these people to us. They know what our rates are. They know pretty much what the client can afford before they're referring them to us. But, when we're talking to the adult child, we're really not necessarily digging into what, their education level is or what their income is. We can assume it. But, in reality, it's their parent who is the ultimate one, for the most part, paying. So I think that's why, some of the numbers and, demographics are all over the place, because we do have multiple markets and we are targeting multiple people. We want the referral sources, who could be any age range. We want, the adult child, and then in some cases we're targeting, independent living facilities or 55+ communities where they're making the decision themselves. So I think that's why it is kind of broad.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. So it could be broad to start with, but what if you look at the actual data and see, in general, in the past, let's say referral program. I know you want everybody to be able to refer, but do you know who the ideal referrer is? Is there a generality of maybe you find out that the ideal referrer is actually between a certain age group or a certain market that you didn't realize? I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to do is, if you say our customer is everybody, you're going to have a hard time figuring out how to develop the marketing idea, because it's tough to market to everybody, especially, so for example, I'm in my early 30s. My father is in his probably late 50s, and my grandfather is late 80s. So the question is, yes, I might come in and say, oh, my grandfather needs some help. My father might do that, but the way that we approach the subject is totally different. I have a totally different way of thinking about, the healthcare of my grandfather versus my father thinking about his dad. And so I would just say, think about how you would approach these people differently. So yes, you would go after both, but just think about, first off, which one's more profitable to go after, which one it has, because here's the thing, both of us may care and both of us may reach out, but he might be the one that actually pulls the trigger because he probably has more cash to pay. He's probably going to be the one to pay for it. While I might influence it by the fact that I might be the one that does some of the research and might say, hey, reach out to this company and check them out. So just think about that a little bit. Just how are you going to target me versus him versus maybe even my grandfather who might be on the computer messing around trying to figure out, maybe I need some help in the home that I don't know how to get it. That's all I'm saying is just look at your internal data and see if there's any similarities right now that are generating actual revenue. Like look at the analytics. Is a certain range of, we're not even getting into like where they work or any of that stuff, or if they're educated, just age range. Just look at that first by city and see which one happens to be performing best. Start at least at that part for a particular market, and just do a test and say, listen, in New Jersey, between the ages of, let's say, 42 and 60, for some weird reason, there seems to be a correlation that this particular age gap or age section happens to bring in the most amount of referral visits or whatever to our site or whatever, or calls or however you guys do the lead generation.
Eugene, it's Jenny from New Jersey. Just sort of piggybacking on what Julie said, I think the challenge is that a lot of times the children of the client have power of attorney. So it's almost like a dual persona, because the individual needs to buy in, but ultimately there's usually a son or daughter or somebody else who has power of attorney. So that's, I think, where we're sort of split, but they literally are both our buyers. It's that person's money, they need buy-in, but the son or daughter has power of attorney.
So is a son or daughter, so how often is a son or daughter the one that's actually deciding? Is it almost always or no? Like, who makes the final decision?
I mean, in my experience,
I'd say
it's really been both, Go ahead, Julie. What would you say?
No,
like the person who has power of attorney, the person who has power of attorney is ultimately, I guess, making the decision to sign the forms and move forward, but they really look at that individual for the buy-in, So it really is sort of a dual effort.
And so who do you think is the person that finds your service, or how do they decide that, well, we're going to reach out to this company? Is it the son, or is it the actual father?
It's usually
it's usually a third party.
Yeah. It's usually the facility. It's usually the facility, the hospital. They're the ones making the referral to the adult child or power of attorney. They're the ones typically reaching out to caring people themselves for their parent or their client.
Okay, and so those people at the facility, how do they decide who to refer?
You know what, this is Michelle from New York. Can I just chime in for a second? Because I think where the confusion is coming from is there's two different demographics that we're looking for here. And if this is for purpose of SEO and PPC, then we need to redo this and consider the population that's actually on the computer searching for these services, which is, I think personally, totally different than the ones that we're out in the field working with. With that being said, the age group would be a lot younger, and it probably would more likely be a younger family member that's searching online for home care service, as opposed to the hospitals, where it's a lot of times, for me, it's either the patient who is asking information, it's the sometimes it's a family member, and most of the time it's the case manager, which really is not going to help us with online marketing, or nurse, or whoever that decision maker is within the hospital. So I think that's why the age range and the education, everything's all over the place. I just think that this might have been kind of done differently than what we're looking to do.
And here's the thing, though. You can have multiple personas. That's fine. The thing is, the SEO and the PPC stuff, yeah, that's important. But in general, you don't need to focus on that just for a buyer persona. You need a buyer persona regardless of SEO, PPC. Yes, for SEO, it completely makes sense because the way you write content has to appeal to a certain type of customer. But in general, every company has a buyer persona. Like I work for a company where we sell office supplies, where I work for a very large company. And so for us, we have to define who that customer is, because if we don't, then we don't know who to market to. We like for us, it's an office admin, and we know everything about her. We know her age range. We know she's got kids. We know she's got, whatever it is. We know all this information, and we use those levers to figure out how to actually market to her. Because if she doesn't know about us, well, how are we going to convince her? I mean, just because offering low prices is not ideal. So I'm just kind of trying to say you need to look at the marketing or the customer persona in general, regardless of SEO, PPC. That's all. Yes, there might be multiple personas in the market, but maybe dissect exactly who that person is throughout the entire buyer journey. So you have maybe the children that are doing the research. Maybe you have the parents that are making the decision with their parents. What makes that decision for them important? And how do they discover you guys? If it's the referral program, then you have that, I guess you can have a third persona where it's the person that's referring. And why are they referring you guys? Is there a particular reason? Are they just don't have a lot of time and they're just Googling, or are they looking at brochures, or are they, how are they being targeted to make sure that they know about your company? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, totally. But I'm just trying to say is that we have so many different types of buyers, because a lot of times our customers are the actual people in the facilities that work there, the healthcare providers.
Is there any way to figure out which customer generates the most, or which type of customer generates the most amount of revenue?
Well, it depends on the facility. If it's a hospital, and it depends on the state. New York, it could be a nurse case manager, sometimes a social worker, but they're weeding out social workers in the city. In New Jersey, it depends on the facilities as well. So there's so many different types of customers, and most of our business is coming from the healthcare workers themselves. So it's a third-party sell.
So is there any generalities you could at least use to put together?
Eugene, sorry, it's Adina. I just wanted to jump in for a second. Michelle, I think there would be a buyer persona to the third-party referrers that you're referring to, so the referral sources. And I think that maybe you're creating a buyer persona for a hospital discharge planner, and maybe you're creating a buyer persona for a rehab discharge planner. That I think that if we can hone in more on who that individual is, and if we could, as Eugene is saying, come up with similarities between them, we can actually focus, you guys can focus your efforts on accounts that are going to be much more profitable.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I'm saying I think there's multiple people here. So I do think that's a good idea that we focus on the people actually referring, and then the customer as well.
Any other questions? Hello?
Going once, going twice, last call for questions.
Somebody wants to get out for the weekend, even though it's the beginning of the day.
Eugene, I want to thank you so much for the presentation. Actually, I think that you kind of laid the groundwork for us internally to really focus on this project more, seeing the answers from our team and seeing that there's great disparities in all the areas that you mentioned. Really also highlights the fact that we're all really looking at this from a different place. And just to add, an asterisk here, this is only about our clients and paying customers and referral sources. We haven't even talked about who's our buyer persona for the home health aides and the caregivers. That's a whole other buyer persona that we're looking at. So I think you've really given us a lot of information for us to really talk about and strategize more. So I want to thank you again so much. Really appreciate the presentation. And thank you, Karina, for organizing it and putting us in touch with Eugene. And thank you, everybody else, for participating. Hope you have a great weekend, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody. Bye.